and welcome to Level Up and Friends, the show where those of us from Level Up get some friends and we pick a topic that we want to discuss and talk about it. It's a pretty simple premise for a show. This week's topic, we're going to be talking about the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, kind of what we hope to see from the sequel here. I'm your host, Scott, and joining me this week.
I'm Morgan. I have cosplayed with Level Up for a few years now. I've been a judge at some of the events. I am also a very big Legend of Zelda fan. I've done a Link costume and I have some other Link costumes up my sleeve as well, so I'm a big fan.
And I am Sean, one of the owners of Level Up Entertainment. You may recognize me from Level Up Entertainment, but I haven't been there in a while, and I'm really excited to talk about Zelda because it is probably the video game series that got me interested in video games in the first place, and it's one of the very few things that I collect stuff from. So I have lots of thoughts and opinions.
I know, and that's why I chose both of you guys to join me for this conversation. So I guess that'll start us in. So ultimately, the goal of this episode is to talk about speculation on Breath of the Wild 2 and what we'd like to see from it. But I'd like to give a little bit of context for listeners about our history with the Zelda franchise. My first Zelda game that I owned was I think was Ocarina of Time. I had friends growing up that had it for NES and SNES. I'd played at their house, but I wasn't really into it. And then I saw Ocarina of Time and it just blew my mind. And I think it might be the game I've beaten the most in the history of my history of playing video games. I've beaten it. I had to beat it at least 10 times back when it was like relevant. And I've played it since then, but since then I just got the bug for it. And I think it's become my favorite Zelda series. It's the one I collect all the releases for. I have all of them except for the CDI games, which I don't count. One, because they're not on Zelda consoles, and two, because they're prohibitively expensive and bad. So that's my history with the Zelda franchise. Morgan, what's your history with it?
The first Legend of Zelda game I played was the first one on the NES because my dad had an NES, and that's kind of solely what I played until the GameCube came out. So I wasn't really into them on that console either. I used to get to the first cave in the first game with the flying eyeballs, and then I got scared and I kind of quit almost every single time. And then I had friends who had Nintendo 64s, and I had played Ocarina of Time kind of on and off with them, and I really liked it. And then it wasn't until Wind Waker came out on the GameCube that I actually fell in love with the franchise. And then I've gone back and played all the older ones since. So
that's good. Sean, how about you?
Man, I'm the old guy here. So
you only got me by a couple of years. It's not
a few. Yeah, I got you. It's not too bad. But I was gonna say my first game was definitely the Legend of Zelda on the NES, and I'll never forget playing that at a friend's house before I owned it. Because I had a couple of friends in the neighborhood. I could walk to their house, and they had NES games. And that was always the game that I would put in. And you know how it had the save files? It had 3 files. I had at least a save file on 2 other cartridges around the neighborhood, because you just go and pick up where you left off, or at least I would. And that game was that, and Metroid were the 2 NES games that really sparked my imagination of what a video game could be, especially with Zelda. And the series has kind of always captured my attention in that way, that it's always been this really imaginative exploration fantasy world. I don't know, it's the games that feel like the closest to the original Zelda games are always my favorite in the series, but beyond that, I would say it's like I said, the only series I collect. I have almost every single release except for the CDI games. I have multiple releases of specific games like Ocarina of Time, 2 versions on the N64, 3DS, digitally a couple times. It's and then all the systems they've done so many Legend of Zelda systems where they do various levels of theming on them. I try to collect all of those. So yeah, I've been a pretty big fan for a while.
Yeah, so the one Zelda thing I don't collect is the systems. I
was gonna say the systems always look pretty awesome, but that's the line where you're like, oh, I have three 3DSs already. Do I need to buy another one?
Yeah, it's the reason I have multiple 3DSs, and
Yeah.
I stopped at the Wii U. I was like, I don't need another Wii U.
And to
The
be fair,
Wind Waker Wii
yeah.
U release looked awesome though.
It was cool. It was
I
cool. Listen, I wanted it, but
I liked it.
I will say that the Wii U one comparatively is one of the lamer ones.
yeah,
It's just
it was.
on the gamepad and it's just like the Triforce and like some like symbols from it. It's
Yeah.
not like it's a gold Wii U or
Oh, if it had been gold, no question, I would own that.
Yeah, because
yeah.
it was black with the gold decal, right? Like
Yeah.
around the pad and the
Yeah, because some of the Zelda
So-
ones, like I said, comparatively, some of the Zelda consoles have been like,
they're flashy.
yeah, they're really cool.
Yeah.
Like I am jealous that you have some of the limited edition Zelda stuff, but like I said, I gotta draw the line somewhere. I
Oh,
only
yeah,
have room in
no,
my heart
it's-
for like one version of each console.
Well, like I said, I don't collect a lot of things. Like I don't
Yeah.
have a big gaming collection. I've filtered through it over the years, but Zelda stuff is just anything Zelda related. I hang on to.
What would you two say your the hardest like collector's item was to get for you both? Like was
to
it like
get.
a release item that was hard?
Zelda related?
Yeah, I would say the hardest thing I've got was like it's got to be some of the amiibo because they're just really hard to get in general. Like the coolest thing I have is I've got the like standee for when they re-released Ocarina of Time on 3DS, but that wasn't hard because I just stole it from GameStop because I
Yeah.
worked there at the time. But yeah, probably not too hard. I mean, I guess I have a bit of an advantage for some of the like rarer releases for the games in that I work in a used game store, so stuff just eventually comes across my counter,
That's true.
Yeah.
and I'm kind of first to like be like, well, this isn't going on the floor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've had quite a few pristine copies of like box copies of Zelda games come through throughout the years that did not make
Yeah.
it to the
So
floor.
that's a plus.
Yeah, like
That's a nice advantage.
Like if you dig around on our YouTube page and see some of our old commercials. Oh no, that's right. This one can't be on there because we used copyrighted music. But we did an Indiana Jones thing where he stole a Zelda cartridge for the first game because it's gold out of a thing,
Huh.
out of a pedestal that we had set up so it could like lower after we took it. But that was my copy of Zelda for NES.
Mine is there is one very specific thing that comes to mind. I thought it was funny that you asked it that way too, because then you said like a release, and I don't know if either of you remember, but when Ocarina of Time came out on the Nintendo 64, it had the gold cartridge, right? So there
Yeah.
was the initial release, but it wasn't just the first release that was gold. It was the initial shipment had an allocation of gold cartridges in addition to gray cartridges. So you could buy one or the other, like right from the get-go. And I remember I was such a big Zelda fan that I had pre-ordered that game and paid it off in full with my own money. And this was like, yeah, I was in high school then. So this was like 98 it released. I was so ready for this game, and I had pre-ordered it with Wes upstairs at Games at EB Games at the time. I say upstairs like we're inside the mall.
In the store.
We're
A
also
long time
upstairs.
ago.
Yeah.
But anyway, I had pre-ordered it and paid it off, and I was so excited. I mean, it was just such a big deal to go and pick up this game. And I got there, and they were like, "Well, you can't have it because we don't have enough for everybody, and you didn't pay in full." And I remember to this day, it was one of the only times that I yelled at somebody in public. You know, like behind the counter, because I had the receipt. I'm like, yeah.
You're like, I did though.
Yeah, I did.
This is the only thing I've ever paid for in my entire life.
Right. This is like, I didn't even have a driver's license at this point. I was so excited about this. So I had to go home empty-handed because he just wouldn't give me a copy. He said they didn't have enough. And I remember I got home. I forget how I got there now that I think about it, but I told my mom. And yeah, so this is the way the story ends. So my mom calls and yells at them. And they're like, well, no problem, because we see that he paid for it and he can come in and get it. So we drove back out to the mall. I get the box, you know, it's the one with the foil on the cover. It's like kind of extra shiny. And to say sorry, they gave me a bag. It was like, I think it was supposed to be for pre-orders, and they only had a limited number of those too. It was a gold Zelda bag, and I still have it. I should have dug it out.
That's
A
awesome.
poster and like I forget, there was a couple of things, maybe some coupons or something in it, but I held on to all of that because it was so triumphant that after being told no, I was like crushed and then soared back up. And
That's great.
It's
I'll
funny.
never
Yeah,
forget.
I think my first game I bought was also for N64. It was Super Smash Brothers,
Nice. That was,
which
was
also
kinda
has
late.
Zelda in it. So,
How about you, Morgan? What's your
So I didn't buy a lot of things on release just because I was pretty young for a lot of the newer Zelda, Legend of Zelda games. Like I said, the first one I really jumped into was like Wind Waker, but I I was working at GameStop at the time Breath of the Wild came out. And I remember like waking up after they had announced the like legendary editions with the Master Sword thing, and I was like, I need that. And I remember I like went onto the GameStop website because I was like, maybe I can pre-order as soon as I get into my shift at work, and they were already gone. And I was like, no. And I remember I was at work and I was ringing people up and on my phone at the same time because I was a terrible employee. And I had been refreshing Best Buy's page all day because they were the only ones who had not listed theirs yet. And I was like, okay, I have to get one. And I remember I refreshed the page in the middle of like picking a customer up, and I saw it come up, and I ran into the back room, and I was like, told my manager, I was like, need to ring this person up because I need to do this now. And he was like, they can wait. And he's standing over my shoulder as I'm like ordering it on my phone. And I remember like when it said my order was confirmed and I got the email, and I'm like screaming, and we kind of like realized like, oh, there's still like a customer out there very confused. And so I just like ran away. But so that was a really great thing. And then when it was released and it was, you know, the same day as the Switch, I dressed up as Link from Breath of the Wild at the midnight release at my store. And I was like so excited because I'm sitting there, and I picked up my Switch, and then I was like, okay, as soon as the midnight release is over, I'm going across the street to Best Buy to go pick up my Legendary Edition game. And I remember standing in line in the cold in this like Link costume, just like so excited to go inside. And I went inside, and I remember I was like, I'm here to pick up Breath of the Wild, the Legendary Edition. And the guy behind the counter, after I had waited in line for hours, was like, oh, we don't have those. And I was like, yes, you do, because it says it's here. I have a receipt. I've had this order confirmed for like months now. And he's like, oh, you pre-ordered it. I was like, yeah. He's like, so you're like one of the 2 people who got one. And I was like, that must be me. And he was like, sure enough. And I'm sitting there like, am I about to start crying in a Link costume in Best Buy at like 2 a.m. right now? Because that's what it felt like. So that was kind of like you. It was like very triumphant.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
But I mean, even then, like it wasn't an awful thing. I'm sure like a lot of people have been reselling the statues and stuff by now, but that was one of the harder collector's editions of anything to get that I've had to deal with.
Oh, it broke my heart that I couldn't get that one. I was absolutely devastated because I remember we watched the reveal for it in the store, and we were like, "Oh, it's so!" And it was like, forget it.
Well, because they pretty much release them like right after that direct or whatever. Because I remember waking up the next morning and nobody having any, and I had missed the direct the night before, so I was like, oh, so they're gone already.
Without going off on the tangent, it's hard to be a Nintendo fan because you have to be on top of things. You cannot catch up on the news the next day. If you don't watch that direct, you missed it. Whatever it was, it's gone.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of being directs and being on top of things, I mentioned this because this is how our luck would work out. There's a rumor that in 2 days a Nintendo Direct will happen. And the reason I was holding off on this episode because like, you know, June was supposed to be E3. They might still put out their trailers. And I was kind of expecting a Breath of the Wild 2 one. So there might be a trailer dropping after we've recorded this, but before it's posted.
Oh, man.
So we won't be talking about what's going on in that, obviously. But I just wanted to get ahead of that before like the comments are like, why didn't they talk about Ganondorf's mom showing up? And
I love that it's pre-stale. Like you can't like you're doing it. Things move so fast. You're recording a podcast and you're already behind the times. You know, It's already stale content.
I mean, I guess I can always just say, forget my release schedule and just post this immediately. But, you know, I like having the weekly things come out on Friday. It's been kind of fun. Plus, it gives me a chance to edit this and be lazy with editing it. But yeah, so I think this is a good, you know, maybe a good chance to start segueing into our, we'll start with our favorite Zelda games. And I'll go first because I'm hosting this one. But if I don't take nostalgia out of it, I think my favorite Zelda game is Link's Awakening. It's just the game, I just fell in love with it as a kid. Because I think it's a Game Boy, I think it just has a more intimate feel for it. I loved exploring it. I think that's the first one I did. I found all of the secrets and collectibles. I just loved it. But taking nostalgia out of it, I think Majora's Mask is my favorite game.
Really?
Even though I did play that as a kid, the dungeons in it are so good. I love the world. It feels so alive. And I know it's because of the 3-day system and because all of the characters are on their own clocks. So they kind of go about their day-to-day business, and part of the game and the tons of side quests is like kind of learning how everyone works and what they do, and then finding out how to interact with them. I just love Majora's Mask.
Which version?
Normally, I'd probably say the 3DS one superannuates it in a lot of reasons, but that one, I think they made too many changes that made it a little hand-holdy, but you can't go wrong with either of them. It's not like different enough that I'm like, oh, don't buy that one. They made the bosses a lot easier, which I think is the biggest change in its detriment. I know they changed where some of the masks are, so they're not as difficult to find, but it's not game breaking in any way. So I would just go whichever version like is available to you. I will say just 64 stuff in general is hard to go back to just because of that controller.
Yeah. It's a controller, but it's also the graphics. Like I'm a huge fan of, you know, retro style games, and I think the 64 is one of the hardest to just get back into.
It's kind of in the middle. Yeah. It's not exactly like an 8-bit style where you're like, oh, it's retro, but it's not like GameCube where it was a little more, I guess, like the 3D worked better.
Right, yeah, like GameCube's almost semi-modern, you know?
Yeah. I would say the same problem like for all consoles that generation. Like PlayStation 1 is like impossible to go back to for most of those games, in my opinion. Especially the early ones before they had to do analog sticks. Like I can't play Tomb Raider.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like a lot of stuff from that generation I think is rough to go back to. I think unless there's like, it's probably might be a hot take, but like GoldenEye is unplayable now.
You got to change the control scheme, man. You got to put on Kissy and then put your hands on top of the controller.
Oh God. That said, we do have like new retro N64 controllers that you can play with in the original hardware, but like they have the dual sticks and stuff.
Nice.
So they look like normal controllers and not like this weird trident thing.
So before we get back on track with Zelda, I wanted to ask, do you think that, oh man, I just lost my train of thought. So like, feel free to edit this part out, but I was, oh yeah. Do you think that those graphics are like nostalgic at all? Like, because for me, they're not. Like, I look back at them and I'm like, all right, I remember these games looking better, but even then I remember being aggravated by it. I know like this is not the topic, but I'm just curious.
That said, I think speaking N64 games specifically and keeping it to Zelda, because Ocarina of Time is so muddy and ugly.
Right.
I will say games that use the expansion pack, like I think Majora's Mask looks much better. Donkey Kong 64 looks okay. Certain games, like I guess it depends on the art. So like I think Mario 64 looks fine.
I think Mario 64 actually has aged well, but now we're getting really off topic. I was just curious. Morgan, do you like? Do you look at the N64 era graphics with like the thick fog? And
it's
the, like,
really hard because, like I said, I didn't personally own one. My friends had them and I played with them. So like I never went through the full like Mario 64, but my boyfriend loves that game. And so I got a 64 this year for Christmas as like his gift. And his first thing was, you have to play Mario 64. And I sat down and I was like, I know you love this and I don't want to crap on your dreams. Yeah. But like I don't know if I can do this right now. And I was like, I know it's like a nostalgia thing. And I asked him the same thing. I was like, do the graphics look like this to you too, or is it just because I haven't played this before? I don't know. I think it is that weird in between, and I think if it's a game you really love, you can get past it. But if you're not invested, I feel like even back then you could tell there was some annoyance there.
Well, I mean, those graphics were mind-blowing to me when I was a kid. But yeah, I definitely do not feel remotely the same way. I think there's a certain charm to some games. Like, again, a little off topic, but like since it's the same generation, I kind of love the way the original Final Fantasy looks. Or not Final Fantasy VII.
Oh yeah, no, actually, totally. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
There's something about like how clunky it is that makes it charming. And I think that Ocarina of Time has some of that. I think N64 games suffered because they had the like super foggy look. Like no matter what, they looked muddier. Whereas like PlayStation games like Final Fantasy VII or Resident Evil, even with the pre-rendered backgrounds, kind of aged a little more gracefully.
I think of like
We
the
are way
Tomb
off
Raider
topic.
games.
Yeah.
And like how it could like
yeah.
So Sean, what's your favorite Zelda game?
Oh man, every time I think about it, I feel like I come up with a different answer. So I'm going to say A Link to the Past because that's the Zelda game I played most recently with my kids. And we were like maybe I think we have 3 maidens left to rescue in the Dark World before we beat the game. So like we're pretty far in. Haven't touched it in a bit because Animal Crossing happened. That's the only thing we can play now.
Well, I guess your kids are digging it though, right?
Oh, they loved it. They absolutely loved it. And I did not set out to show them this game. Like there have been games where I've set out and I'm like, we're going to play this game together, guys, because it's great. And I think you should experience it.
And you better like it.
and it's like required. Daddy doesn't love you if you don't like it. But I was playing this kind of just to kill time on the Switch because they have the SNES games available digitally. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I own it. I mean, I think I have 4 or 5 copies of it right now. I have Game Boy Advance, obviously Super Nintendo, on the Switch.
Yeah.
The 3DS didn't have Link to the Past, did it? Or was it in the eShop? If it was, I didn't get that one.
Okay. I had the ambassador thing, so I might have had other.
Oh, you might have, because I know there were some like limited edition digital releases for that. But like anyway, point is I have a bunch of different versions of it. Oh, I have the Japanese version of it.
I've got the Super Famicom version.
It's great because it's like one of those games you can get for $10 and it's a nice little thing.
And it's totally playable because there's like barely any text.
Right. Anyway, so I had just been playing it to kind of kill some time, and they just started watching over my shoulder. Like they'd come around, I'd have the Switch, they'd be like, "What are you doing?" My daughter would have a million questions about it, and then she would be like, "I want to play with you. Can you put it up on the TV?" So like put it up on the TV, and then like my son would come in, and we'd all be playing it together. And I just feel like as far as it's funny because it was a relatively early game for the Super Nintendo. It was like I think it was like 93, right? So it was like 2 years in.
Yeah, I thought it was a year or 2 in, so that sounds about right.
So like there's some things about it that like were graphically impressive at the time, but now kind of look like, okay, this is built on a tile. You know, like this is a game that it's a marginal improvement over the original Legend of Zelda. Whereas at the time it felt like just light years beyond the original. But so like it's still charming and it's still infinitely playable. Like the game has such tight controls and the way that things interact with it and how it rewards you interacting with the world, which is why like I love the original, I love that one, and I love Breath of the Wild, because for me those are the ones that encourage you to just literally poke everything and see what happens. So I mean, and before, like, let me be slightly more self-indulgent because I have another story about A Link to the Past and retail. Do you remember Toys R Us used to have, when Toys R Us was a thing and they sold video games, they used to have the video game aisle were like these little plastic sleeves, and in the sleeves there were these paper slips. And
it's kind of like basically like a card you bring up to the counter.
Yeah. Then there were no games anywhere. There was like laminated game boxes, and you could like flip them up to look at the front and the back. And it was like a cool way to browse it without having people walk off with, you know, $80 cartridges all the time.
Yeah.
But I remember the Toys R Us at Maze Landing had a big banner. It said Legend of Zelda coming soon. And it was, you know, 1992 or something. And it was before the internet, and I had Nintendo Power. So Nintendo Power was hyping up A Link to the Past. So I knew what it was. And I remember you could pre-order it. And there was like, same thing where you'd go down the aisle and they had like a placeholder card, but it didn't have the actual game box. It was just like, you know, the old Legend of Zelda logo, but it said Super Nintendo next to it. And I remember we paid for it, and I would ask my mom every week to go out there to see if they had it yet. Because you didn't know when, like, you couldn't just like say, hey Siri, when is Legend of Zelda Link to the Past coming out? Actually, just had to look around to make sure I didn't.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that was going to pop up, and that would be hilarious.
The iPad's in the other room, so we're good. But so I remember it was just like constantly bugging her to go out there and get it. And then eventually, you know, it was out, and they did have it, and I got to play it, and it was awesome. Within a week, I lost it because I don't even remember what I did, but I got punished. I did something worth being punished, and my mom took away my Super Nintendo and A Link to the Past within a week of having it. And I was so desperate to play the game that I would get home a little bit before her. She was a teacher. So I would get home from school, and I found where it was, like, real quickly. And I would hook it up and, like, play, like, 10 minutes and, like, wait for her. And as soon as I hear her card, like, save it, turn it off, throw it back in the closet, like, pretend like I never touched it. So
That's great.
So
All right,
I'm gonna go with
Morgan,
that.
yeah, so Morgan, how about you? What's your favorite? I know what it is, but let's let the people at home know.
Okay. I've been very vocal about it already, I feel like. So my favorite Legend of Zelda game is Wind Waker, which it's one of the unconventional in the sense it's, you know, like Toon Link. That was Toon Link. It wasn't really, yeah. So that has a huge nostalgia factor for me, just because, like I said, I had played like Ocarina of Time. I'd played the Legend of Zelda games on the NES, the Super Nintendo, but I hadn't really gotten into the franchise until I got that game, and I just loved it. It was the first game that I really like was finding the secrets on my own, and I was like, you know, the open world concept of that like blew my mind. Just like, oh, so I can just sail to any island on this map, right? And almost every island has a secret. And between like that and the amazing, like, I love almost all the characters in that game. I think the characters in that game are by far some of my favorite in the entire series, and the soundtrack is great, and the dungeons, and like I've replayed that game probably 10-15 times. When it came out in the Wii, I was all over the HD, and even now, like, I'll go back and I'll play it on the GameCube and it still holds up. The only problem I have is the inverted camera that the GameCube liked to do on everything, but once you get past that, it's fine. So that's by far my favorite game. Legend of Zelda game.
I love Wind Waker. My only problem with it is it's just not enough.
Yeah.
It's light on dungeons and stuff.
The dungeons are like really great, and I think the bosses are really great, but I agree, like, you want more of that because of how cool they were.
It's just, it has one of the lower dungeon counts. I know I picked Majora's Mask, which only has 4. But sometimes for that game, for me, it's the quality world. But I agree with what you said about, I loved exploring and filling in my map and finding every island having a secret.
Finding every single Triforce piece in the ocean.
Did you ever complete all of the figurines you could get? Because I did that on the GameCube, and I wanted to do it again on the Wii U version. I just was like, I don't have time for this anymore.
I have. So I replayed it a couple times, and I just went back and I made sure I got like all the hearts you could get. So like doing the side stuff and getting all the heart containers. And then like eventually I was like, you know what? I need to go through with the camera and do the figurines. And I did that, and it was very satisfying. It did take a lot of time, but another thing about that game is like, I feel like the dungeon count is low, but that one had so many little like mini games in it that were fun to do too. Like you did like the flying stuff where you're jumping off the pier and you have to try and fly as far as you can, and it had like all the little random like battleship games you'd find on the island. That guy was just, you know, chilling in the shop and he's like, oh, you want to play a weird game? And you're just like, I guess. Like that stuff was super fun to just like, and like Beetle. Oh my gosh, he alone is why I love the game.
Yeah, see, that's why he keeps showing up.
Well, that's up there for me, honestly. Wind Waker is I think it's one of the better Zelda games for all the reasons that you said.
That made me fall in love, and then after that, I was like, wow, I've really slept on this series, and that's kind of when I went back, and I was like playing the old ones. Like I went back and I did Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask and Link's Awakening and everything, and I was like, this series is great. Why is this the first time I'm like getting into it? But I still love that over all of them.
Well, we started on a positive foot, so let's move on to a negative one. Now, I want to preface in saying I think the worst Zelda game is still a good game. We're talking like degrees of greatness, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But my least favorite Zelda game is Twilight Princess.
Wow.
I think the dungeons in it are great, which to me like is what makes it a good game. I think it is so dark and so ugly, and I don't like the story. I hate Hunt and Pose. Like there's so much in it that I'm like, could be better. But I think the art style in it is what really is very off-putting to me. But like I said, I do think it's got a lot of great points. I was kind of hoping that when they re-released it on Wii U, because I have to get every Zelda game, I was like, you know what? All right. It's been a long time since I played this because I first played it when it came out on the Wii. And I liked it at the time, but it was like one of those ones that just didn't stick with me. But like a lot of my problems were still persistent with it. I don't know. Like Midna is exciting, but like nothing else. No one else in that game is memorable.
I know what you mean, though. No, I know what you mean. Yeah. It's one of my least favorites. Like I remember, same thing at the time. Like I was super hyped for that game.
I was so hyped for it because the Wii was also really exciting with the swinging the swords and stuff.
Yeah, and like Morgan referenced the Toon Link controversy. Like this was the adult Zelda. This was the dark Zelda.
It was such an overcorrection.
Are you sick of the cartoon Zelda? Well, this one's for the cool kids. Yeah, and like it was really exciting though because it seemed like they were taking it seriously. And then the opening part of the game is like 3 hours of tutorial to tell you how to play a Zelda game. That's pretty much the same as every Zelda game you've played over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Come on, let me enjoy it. I think there's a lot of good stuff in that game, but I feel like it actively fights against you, like to get.
I love that art style. Like, was that one released right after Wind Waker?
It was at the end of the GameCube's lifespan.
Yeah, I played it on GameCube, and I remember it was like going from like Wind Waker to that, and I was like, oh, this is different. But I really liked the art style. It's probably not one of my top favorite games because of other things. Like I don't think there's a whole lot to do in it otherwise. Like they had like what was it like the fishing? And you're just like the bug collecting, and you're like, I don't really know if that appeals to me. So yeah, and it didn't have many characters. It had the creepy warp dungeon chicken.
What was up with that chicken?
I hated that chicken
or something?
so much.
I will say that
like 30 moves.
I do think think the dungeons were very good because their dungeon, whereas the ruined city in the sky, was actually really cool.
A lot of those dungeons were cool.
Yeah, I love the one with like the Yeti Mansion.
That one had a lot of the like tools that you had to use. Like I replayed it maybe like last year or 2 years ago, and like every time I thought I was getting close to the end, I was like, oh wait, I'm still missing like 5 items that I need to go through dungeons with. And I was like, this is a lot longer than I remembered.
It does feel really stretched out too, like almost a overcorrection. Not only like Scott, you were saying overcorrection for Wind Waker's art style, but like almost like, oh yeah, well we didn't get to put a lot of dungeons in this one. Yeah, and there weren't a lot of tools, so let's just let's add a lot more tools. What if we had a top? A spinning top.
Once. So you stand on. That was one of my favorite dungeons in that game.
Yeah, say for
that was
that
an
dungeon,
awesome
thing.
Yeah, for that
and
dungeon,
the boss
the
fight
top
was
is
rad.
cool.
Yeah.
It was.
Oh, yeah.
There's like awesome moments, but I mean, like, I ultimately, I kind of agree with you, Scott. I think it's not my favorite, but it's like
it's kind of. I feel like compared to a lot of them, it's kind of forgettable.
Yeah. Like I said, I think
that's
it's
just
good...
kind of where it, like that, in my mind, that's kind of where it sits. It's just, I liked the art style, and there was a lot of, like, really cool things about the game, but, like, otherwise.
I have a theory as to why this is, and it's not an original theory, you know, other people have said this, but if you remember, originally, if you played it on the GameCube, Morgan, you probably don't know this, or maybe you do, that when they brought it over to the Wii, they had to reverse the map, and they literally just flipped everything. Every asset in the game flipped because they wanted people with the Wii to have the sword in the right hand and the shield in their left for the Wii remote. But because Link is left-handed, originally the game was programmed with Link holding the shield and, you know, or the sword in his left, like he always does.
Yeah.
So if you look at the world map on the GameCube one, it's identical, and overlay it with Ocarina of Time, it's identical. It lines up perfectly.
Oh.
It's almost like it's a remake of Ocarina of Time in a lot of ways, and a lot of things line up if you think about it that way. Not just the map, but like the way you go through the dungeons, the storyline. There's a ton of similarities, so it feels like, well, let's do Ocarina of Time again, but darker, but also more linear, because the Hyrule Field is just like a series of tunnels. You can't really like roam. But yeah, like to me, that's always why it's felt forgettable, because it's like kind of just a worse version of Ocarina of Time.
Yeah. So with that, Morgan, what's your least favorite Zelda game?
My least favorite Legend of Zelda game is, to this day, the only Legend of Zelda game I've started and haven't finished. And I really, really, really wanted to like it. Like, I really did.
Can I guess?
Can you guess?
Is it Spirit Tracks?
No. Well, it's not Spirit Tracks. I'm trying to remember. I beat Spirit Tracks.
Okay.
I played that on an emulator at the time. But no, it's Skyward Sword. And I really feel bad saying that, because I know I loved the look and I loved where the story was going, but I got to the first dungeon and I was enraged using the Wii. I remember when they tell you, like, okay, you have to hold, you know, the sword up, and I'm like holding my Wii remote still like this, and Link is going like this, and I was like, this is not gonna work. I can't do things like this. And I got to the first dungeon and I went through like the first room and I was like, I'm done. And the worst part is I bought that game twice. I bought it when it came out and I went to play it, and then it was in a Wii that a family member sold, and then like a year later I was like, they stole it with my game in it and I should go back and try it, and I waited until it came through at GameStop again and I bought it for like $50 because they never go down in value. And then I did the same thing. I got to the first dungeon. I was like, I can't do it. I can't. So I haven't done it.
I will say,
God, I know you love this game.
Yeah, I will say Skyward Sword is one of my favorites. If you can't handle the motion controls, then it's not.
And I've been like waiting. Like I was like when the Wii U came out, I was like, please give me a Skyward Sword. I will say that I don't have to use the controls for. And even now on the Switch, I'm like, please, because I loved the story and I loved the characters and I liked the pacing, but I couldn't get into it. I couldn't deal with it without the controls.
Many cool things. There were so many cool things in that game, I felt, that were buried by the controls. Because I felt the same way. I got the collector's edition of that one. That's the one that came with the gold.
Or the Wii Plus.
Wii Motion Plus controller. Exactly, I didn't have that. So and it also came with the Symphony soundtrack.
I actually went and saw that.
I have the soundtrack.
So it was a cool collector's edition. But I remember like that was for the Wii Motion Plus, and I was like, cool, it'll be fun. It's gonna be great. I can't wait. And I'm like, whoa, look at it. It's like 1-to-1. It's what we've always wanted from the Wii. But then like you get tired, man. Like, you get tired. You want to sit down, man, and you figure out what the minimal movement is to still play the game. But like the game would get lost, right? Like, and it would think you're over here, and you'd have to turn it over and like press the button and flip it. Like, it was just so obnoxious.
I must have
Sorry,
had a
one more
different
thing, Scott.
Yeah.
And that was a game that told you every time you started it what every single item was.
Oh yeah, that was super. That was the worst of the Nintendo hand-holding things. Yeah, that is
Never turn off your game because
yeah, that is a huge downfall of that game. It's really stupid. But I must have had
a different... You can buy things with that. 900 of them, I know.
I'm not going to defend that part of it. That part is bad.
Go ahead. I'm done.
But I must have had a different setup than people because I never had those problems.
Really?
Like, I never was tired. I'd play for like hours on end. I don't know. Like I said, if the controls are the biggest hurdle. That said, what would you guys think if they remade it for the Switch? Because Joy-Cons work much better.
Oh, I'd play it in a heartbeat if I could use the Pro Controller.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Like, I wouldn't even hesitate to order that and play it, because as long as it didn't have the waggle, if they could take that out, and I know they can, because if you emulate it, you can play with a controller instead. You can emulate the motion on the analog stick. So yeah, I would buy that. I think it's the Zelda game that's like, as much as I love Link's Awakening, a remake of that wasn't super necessary. I do think Skyward Swords probably the one I think would benefit the most from like an overhaul like that. It had such a cool art design, like, and I didn't even know it playing.
It wasn't like cartoony, like Toon Link.
It was the best.
It was kind of in between. Yeah. It was like the perfect.
Well, they if you've read any of the behind the scenes stuff, they talk about the art inspiration being impressionist, like French impressionist painting. So like Monet.
Oh, I could see that.
And what stinks is that the Wii was stuck at 480p. It couldn't go higher than that. Like, you could do 1080i or something. It would look like garbage though. And it completely masks these gorgeous textures and colors that are actually in the game. Like, if you emulate the game and you don't do anything other than display it at a higher resolution, it immediately comes through. And there's like these really gorgeous like brush strokes in the textures that you just can't see.
You can see that. I feel like it wasn't a lot of the promotional art and stuff. Like, I remember seeing like the brush strokes in like the promo art and stuff. But yeah, you're right. Like, I don't feel like I saw any of that in the game. The color palette comes through, but
it's there. It's just ruined.
I think part of the reason they went with that style is because like you can kind of hide the Wii's draw distance and stuff, and if it was more. Because the farther you get, like, the more minimalistic kind of became, like you said, they were doing like an impression thing.
And they did that. They did that again in Breath of the Wild, but I thought it pulled it off a lot better. Like, if you look at the back,
no doubt about that.
It gets more abstract. Sorry, go ahead.
What's your least favorite Zelda game? Unless it's Skyward Sword, in which case we just explained why it's not that good.
Yeah. No, this is another one. Back in the day, whenever a new Zelda game came out, and it's still true today, the worst Zelda game was the game that had just come out before the newest game. And then when the new game came out, that was the worst game, and every other Zelda game was great. And so there was actually a few throughout the years that like I had a love-hate relationship with, where I really wanted to love it and I ended up hating it. And I wouldn't even say I hated Skyward Sword. I didn't finish it, but I was more frustrated with it than hated it. But it's a toss-up for me between Legend of Zelda, or I'm sorry, Link. What was it? Zelda 2: The Adventures of Link.
I figured it would be title.
Yeah. So the second Zelda game on the NES, or the first one on the DS, and I'm trying to remember.
Oh, Phantom
Hourglass.
That
was it. Phantom Hourglass. Just because controls. Talk about controls being frustrating.
Yeah.
And that was super repetitive because you had to go back through it. But I think
Phantom Hourglass was rough.
That's a tie. That's the tie for me. But I'll talk about Zelda 2, just because, with the original Zelda being so formative for me on the NES, Zelda 2 is something I could look forward to, and it was so hard to get my head around. And I thought there was something wrong with me, because this was back in the day where like video games came out and you just played them because that's all there was, and you could like, maybe you owned it, or maybe you borrowed it, or maybe you rented it, but it wasn't like you could cycle through 50 games on Steam or like your eShop collection. Like, you just had a game and you figured it out, and that game was inscrutable. Like it was almost impossible to play. And I argue that it is impossible to play because not only did you need the manual, but you also had to put two and two together in a way, or like, that's not even a good way of saying it. You had to draw conclusions for how to play it. Like the hammer, for instance, there's an item that's the hammer, and it allows you to, on the world map, chop down trees. And there's really no reason to indicate that it does that, but that's how you find this one. I think it's a town that's hidden, and the only way to get it, by the way, it's not like, oh, I memorized it, it's in this tile, I just have to walk 4 tiles up and 3 tiles over. It's different every time you play the game. So it's random. You just got to like knock down the trees until you find it. The whole time there's these monsters coming at you, and it's awful. Like the game is so unfriendly and frustrating, and there's a lot of cool stuff in it. Like the fact that you can attack high and low and do like the downward strike.
That
and
was different.
Switches between 2D and the world map. But man, it just like one of the first villagers you can talk to just says, "I am error." It's not an Easter egg. They just didn't have dialogue.
It's like, oops.
So I mean, and that was also back when like we didn't really understand what a game sequel was. Like there really wasn't much of a concept of it. So a lot of games back then would get a sequel that was either the same game with slightly different colors. Like, you know, Mario Brothers got the sequel in Japan where it was basically just Mario Brothers again, but they moved things around.
And then they got a weird sequel here like Zelda 2.
Right. And then there were other examples like Zelda 2 where they would just go like completely off course with like an entirely different gameplay setup. And then it would be like, oh, I guess it didn't work. Let's go back to the other one. But yeah, I'd say Zelda 2 is my least favorite.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about the DS games. Those control schemes are terrible.
I was gonna say, I feel like the DS games are kind of they're also like forgettable. Except for I was very impressed by A Link Between Worlds.
Okay, that game's amazing.
Oh yeah.
I loved that game. I picked it up because it came out. I was like, okay, well, the other ones didn't really impress me, and then I started playing it, and I was like, this is really fun. And I remember like all the bosses are really fun.
Yeah, it's a fantastic game. Well, I mean, that's A Link to the Past. It's
exactly.
Basically the same. It's the same map.
Yeah.
More or less the same controls. Yeah. Anyway.
All right. So those are our favorite and least favorite Zelda games, with some other thoughts on other games there too, which is fine. But now we got to start getting a little bit into the heat of the discussion here. So Breath of the Wild, since Breath of the Wild 2 seems to be, I forget what interview I read, I think with Algie Numa, where they're like, it's going to be the same Hyrule, because it's going to be kind of like an Ocarina of Time to Majora's Mask thing, where we're like, we already spent all this time and money making these assets, we can kind of use them to make another game without having to wait another like million years.
Yeah, good.
So good. So we get the same Hyrule, which was fun to explore. I want to explore it more, and they're going to have like new content in it, which is fine. So I figure before we get into what we want to see them do in Breath of the Wild 2, we should talk a little bit about opinions on Breath of the Wild 1. I'll start it off. I think everything Breath of the Wild wanted to do, everything it set out to do, I think it accomplished extremely well. For me, it fell short in a couple of areas, which is what I play Zelda games for. I know at least Sean has some different opinions on it because you picked it as your 2017 game of the year, which was tough competition. If Mario didn't come out, it would have been mine, but I love Super Mario Odyssey.
It was crazy that they were the same year. It just blows
my mind.
I know.
It was March to October.
They were like the first Switch games.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah.
But I think that with the exception of Hyrule Castle, I think the dungeons were super lame. I don't think that because of the way the shrines were, like a third of them were just combat. And then because you could tackle them in any order, which is a strength for a lot of aspects of the game, they couldn't build on like previous kinds of puzzles you did and do like more difficult iterations of them. The puzzles were all kind of like segmented and kind of not super interesting, which is a big part of why I like the Zelda games is the dungeons and the puzzle stuff. I do think the exploration in it was great. I love the deeper combat. I love how difficult it was, especially in the beginning. I'm not normally a big exploring guy. I like to have a goal and go out and accomplish it. But I do think the exploration in it was really cool. But I think the best thing about the game, and this is kind of harkens back to us playing on like the NES and Super Nintendo eras, is just like swapping stories of things we discovered and found with each
Yep.
other. That was the best part of the experience
Yep.
for me. Because even if we found the same thing, we did everything in such completely different ways. It was like, I didn't know you could set all those thorns on fire. I just used my ice thing to go up and over them to get to the dungeon, to get to the shrine. Like, I remember the first time I saw a dragon, I can't talk to anyone about this because I was like, people need to experience that for themselves. I was like, oh my God. But yeah, so that's my opinions on Breath of the Wild. So I think there's a lot of things they can improve on. But I would like to get your guys kind of feel for it first.
Morgan, go ahead, go for it.
I agree with you in the sense that there's like a couple core Legend of Zelda things that they didn't really hit in it, which is weird because it's like I've done this a million times where people have been like, oh, what's your favorite Legend of Zelda game? And I'm like, oh, Wind Waker. And they're like, oh, did you like Breath of the Wild? And I'm like, honestly, I forget that was a Legend of Zelda game. Is that like weird? I was like, I don't know why. And I loved it. I went and I did everything except for the Korok seeds.
Oh, that's the only thing I didn't do too.
There's the one thing I did not do.
That's a good call.
Yeah,
I was like, I could do this, and I was like, maybe if I'm desperate and like I really want to go back into it, and I just like don't want to go back into the story, I'll do that. But yeah, I liked the shrines. I missed the theming of like dungeons. Like we were talking about in our favorite like Legend of Zelda games and even like Twilight Princess and stuff, like these dungeons had really cool themes to them. You know, you have like water, whatever. And so going into the beasts being the dungeon and then kind of being more of the same of the shrines was kind of a bummer for me.
Yeah, quick, name your favorite shrine. No, like you can't. I mean, I don't think you can. Like,
Well, I can name my
exactly. I'm
favorite
trying to
shrine.
remember which is the thing.
Yeah.
You're like, wait.
My favorite shrine was the island exploration one.
Oh, that was rad. Okay,
See,
that was cool.
the best shrines I think were the ones where they had some overworld puzzle because they weren't limited by like you got to be in the same room that looks
It
the
was
same
like-
as all of them.
Finding some of them, was like
Yeah.
more exciting than
Mhm.
the actual shrines.
Like
too.
I'm not gonna say they were all bad because there was some really cool stuff with them, but they were the exception rather than the rule.
Well, and the other thing is, I liked the side stuff. Like I went and I did the side missions, and they were fun. And the stuff with like the sledding was neat, and you'd stumble upon fun things like that. But I do wish I really didn't feel an attachment to almost any of the characters in this game, and which is strange. And like even the side quests, I wish the characters were a little more exciting, like because then I go back to Wind Waker and I think like, oh, I feel like I loved every character I ran into in that game, and now this game I'm like, this guy is just telling me to go get his stuff back from the banana people and like that's it, like that's all he wants, or this guy's telling me there's a cool horse over there and that's like it, and like that's fun. But and even like the heroes, I really only liked like Mifa and that was and what's her face? What are the desert people?
The
Garuda.
like Urbosa was her name.
Urbosa, that's who it was. I liked her, and like I liked that area, and whoever the princess was, her daughter or whatever. That was
don't
cool.
ask me what her name is. I forget.
Yeah. That was cool, but
I don't know.
otherwise, like I didn't really feel an attachment to many of the characters. Even like Zelda, I hate to say it, I loved her, but I was also like,
Oh, this is my favorite Zelda.
really?
She's my favorite. Oh yeah, I think she's the best one. I think she's the best Zelda.
I
She's
I
like a
liked
nerd. It's
how-
great.
I liked how much she was in it, and I liked how they kind of showed more of her actual
Yeah.
life.
I will
Yeah,
say
it was kind of about her, like in a way.
Yeah,
She's not in it, but she's still central to the
She's
story.
there, and you kind of are still seeing her story, even though, like you said, she's not physically there like the entire time. I don't know. I liked her. I just didn't feel that
You
attachment.
cannot like her. I'm not telling you you're wrong. I
No,
just
I
happen to
did.
really like Zelda.
I
in this
did.
one.
I just didn't feel the attachment like I normally do, which was kind of weird. And I think that's one of the reasons why when people were like, "Oh, did you like Breath of the Wild?" I'm like, "Yeah, I love it." But I also like completely forgot it was a Legend of Zelda game because I'm not thinking of the dungeons or the characters or.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that, honestly. It is up there for me with one of my favorite Zelda games. But
for sure.
I do think its biggest fault is the fact that most of it is very forgettable because it does blend together. It's just like one of those things that comes along with being an open world game. It's
the exploration I feel like you remember over everything, and not the story or
right, and like figuring out the physics and what you can do with the puzzles, like Scott was talking about, swapping the stories, like that is the stuff that is memorable, but not necessarily the story. Like you can actually go from like point like the plateau where you start the game right to Ganon's castle, and people have done that, and I think it's amazing. But like, you know, when you have a setup like that, you're going to have to sacrifice like a consistent story with good pacing, right? And that was one of my biggest complaints about it, is that I loved the characters. I thought the characters were really cool, and I wanted more of them. But they were like the bits and pieces that you get with them are stretched so few and far between.
That's
because
the thing.
I'd spend 4 hours wandering the mountains.
I think that's probably why I didn't feel that connection, because it's like, you know, you go do their areas, it takes you maybe like, you know, if you're doing everything a day or two, and then that's it. Then you don't really see them for the rest of the game.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. So like, while I loved it, and I do really love this game, like the fact that you can just start the game and it doesn't hold your hand. It is exactly what drew me into the original Legend of Zelda. And I remember when they announced it, before they announced it even, Scott and I used to have these conversations all the time. I used to say, I wish they'd go back to the original Zelda. I wish they would go back to like the NES, that you just start on a map, there's no setup, you walk into the cave and you get a sword and you just go on. And this game is set up the exact same way, like where you start there, and I think if I remember it correctly, like you can walk forward and pick up a stick.
Yeah.
Right, and then that's your weapon. But there's like nothing else going on. You just have to go and do it.
I remember they kind of hinted like how to get off the plateau, but that was about it.
I mean, they give you directives, and it's a little more structured than the original Zelda, but it's still that sense of this is a world that is open to you if you can figure out how to navigate it. And you can gatekeep with like, oh, you can't get past this without having this item, but they did that in this game in a very natural way.
Yeah.
As opposed to a glowing red door saying like, oh, you don't have the glyph of wisdom to pass. You know,
you're like, oh, I went up into the mountains without a jacket and I died. So
right? Yeah.
I guess exactly. I need something.
Exactly. So then you get the warm jacket, and then you can go up into the mountains. Exactly.
Well, that's an early one where I think I was talking with Harry about it. Maybe it was you. It was somebody else. Where I was like, oh, I just can munch these hot peppers and I can walk through that. And then someone's like, if you cook them, they last a lot longer. I was like, I don't know how to cook. What? Like, but then someone else is like, you can just get a coat. I'm like, well, whatever. I just ate these things and just ran and didn't waste time. No, that is a good thing about it, because once you get through the quote unquote tutorial area with the plateau, because the game makes sure like it gives you all of its tools right off the bat, but it makes sure you know how to use them before. I mean, you can just jump off the plateau and die, but before you get off with safely, you know, like it does give you the game, and that's all the hand holding it does. The king kind of gives you like a, you should go
spoiler.
Over here. Yeah, and he puts a pin on your map, which you can ignore, because you can go straight to Ganon. I know our friend Harry did that, so you get. What's cool, because I will say Hyrule Castle, I think, is by far the best quote-unquote dungeon in the game, because it maintains all of that exploration stuff that they do. It's a very high-risk, high-reward, because it's all of the most dangerous enemies in the game, but it's some of the best items, and I think it's the only place you can get the Hylian shield. But, like, I remember when I finally was, like, storming the castle at the end, I did all of the beasts. I had the Master Sword. I got my armor all upgraded, and I dyed it green, so I was like storming the castle. And then I was like, oh my god, there's so many Lionel fights, and I just fly away and just kind of up to him. But that was fun because you could kind of tackle it as you wanted. Because I was still exploring some of the interior stuff, because you can blow up certain walls and find like hidden rooms with like treasure. But the main dungeons in the game are the Divine Beasts, and the first time you play, it's really cool. You have to like kind of like take it down. You're teaming up with one of the descendants or someone related to the champions from 100 years ago. So the first one I did was the elephant one, with the Zora. So you're like riding on his back and like you're using all kinds of cool things. Oh, this is awesome. And then you go fight, you're like, oh, this is kind of cool puzzle. And then you do the next one. It's kind of the exact same thing 4 times.
Yeah, that they didn't even really try to make them look visually different is a shame.
That's the thing. Yeah.
Because they have really cool things going on in them, like with mechanics and puzzle solving, but they are similar, right? Like they all have the similar flow to them. They all look exactly the same, which is a shame. Yeah, but I mean, even with all that, the repetitive shrines, I thought some of those shrines were really cool. I love finding them, like you said, Morgan. Like it's just like seeing something, you're like, can I get to that? I think that might be a shrine, or like you'd be doing something completely different, and all of a sudden a freaking shrine would pop up, and it would be awesome.
Like rises out of the ground. You're like, oh,
yeah,
I smacked this rock, and now this happened.
Right, Sean, we might have talked about this in the store when the lead up to the game. I'm not usually a big open world guy. I find a lot of them to be either just jam packed with the same repetitive things to collect and do, or they're really. I was afraid it was going to be really because how massive it is. I was afraid it was going to be really empty and boring, but the world does feel dense. Like you're always stumbling over something, whether it's a Korok puzzle or you can kind of see a shrine in the distance, or like there'll be like people just kind of traveling around. And like this is the first Zelda game where I sort of felt like a hero. Yeah. Because all of a sudden they'll be attacked by moblins or whatever, and you can choose to ignore them. Yeah. But I was like, I rolled up and like saved those people, and like I chose to do that, and I felt really cool for doing that.
And then they turn out to be those damn bandits.
Yeah, and then they turn out to be the
banana people. Yeah. But no, I totally agree. I think because it gave you that freedom, because it created this world that was alive. Normally, I don't like open world games anymore either. Like I had really been burnt out on it by the time this game came out. But I think this game did open world right. Like it still has a lot of the problems, like the conceits that you have to, the things you have to give up by being open world, like a fragmented story that leaves you feeling like you're not very connected to it. But it's so dense, you're constantly discovering something, and you're always rewarded for asking the question, like, what if I did this? And then you do it and something happens, something always happens. And for me, like, forget Zelda, but it's definitely a core tenet of the series for me. But if a video game does that, I'm almost instantly in love with it. Like if I can feel like the designers were like, let's reward the player for knocking down this tree, pushing it down the hill, and then letting it on fire on the way. Like, and then something's going to happen.
Yeah, like, something convoluted.
Right. Like they just threw it in there because they were like, they put it there and they're like, we can see someone doing this. Let's throw some rupees at him if they.
I mean, so many people came up with ways to interact with that game that I never would have thought of. Like even just
using
the time thing on the rocks.
Yeah.
And smacking them so they'll go, and then climbing on them, and then like using that to get around. Like I never would have thought of that.
I still on the daily, like you said, I'm like seeing people posting videos of them like killing guardians in these insane convoluted ways, and I'm like, wow, this game came out a few years ago. People are still freezing the rocks and launching them into space.
I mean, like, because it built a world first. It didn't just come up with a concept and then try to like populate a map with the stuff that like fleshes out that concept. That world exists, both like it's very consciously designed in terms of like the design of the world map, but also in the physics. Like the physics are all very carefully built so that there are like important interactions that are intuitive. Like you mentioned, freezing in the mountains, or what happens if lightning, if you're holding up a sword in a lightning storm, you get zapped by lightning. It makes sense. Like the game never says, watch out, you have metal. It's just, zzz, zzz. And if you don't put it together, you're going to get zapped.
Again, that's like one of the things where you're like, I wonder what happens if I jump in with my electric sword. And it's like the creators are like, well, obviously you're gonna get electrocuted, and you're like, oh dang, I got electrocuted.
Right, exactly. And I like for that alone, like the care and the thought that went into creating this living, breathing world that has this full physics, it's why I love the game so much. Like I agree, like I miss the Lost Woods. Like the Lost Woods was a cool area, but it's like foggy trees, didn't have a lot of personality. I missed, having those dungeons that were like radically different, like the lava dungeon. Like there
That's
really wasn't anything
that's
like
what I
that.
missed.
You know?
Even just the visual. Like
Right.
I almost even wish like the beasts would have a little bit of theming to them if they were even going to be like almost the exact same concept.
Yeah.
But
and I guess I'm Scott. Well, Scott, I don't know. It seems like a good way to say
Yeah,
into.
so we can talk about what we hope they. So I think we can all agree that Breath of the Wild 1 is an amazing base to start from. So yeah, I think even just a couple of like maybe ruin-y kind of dungeons that are maybe optional that you can explore, kind of like how Hyrule Castle was in the first game, I think would be amazing. But yeah, I do think based on the first trailer we've got, which is all we know about the game so far, it does give the illusion that, or at least the impression rather, that story is going to be a bigger focus because you got Link and Zelda and her new hairdo kind of exploring and
she chopped her hair off.
I mean, we're all assuming this is Ganondorf that's like a mummy that's getting resurrected. So there might be more of an emphasis on story because this game's story is really about failing 100 years ago and kind of building yourself back up. So they could tell it in a very non-linear, you're kind of getting your memories back style. They don't have the luxury of doing that with this game because the last game happened.
Right.
So I don't know how they could probably still have an open world story the way that they still do that. It might have to be a little bit more linear. Or maybe like, because in like classic games, you usually do like the first 3 dungeons and then that triggers whatever the next story beat is.
Yeah.
And then like that's when you open up like the rest of the game. Like Link's Awakening does that. Ocarina of Time does that. Basically most of the main series games do that. So maybe that's kind of how they'd get away with it. Like there's maybe a couple of dungeons and areas that are like more deeper to explore, and then something happens like, and then all of a sudden like more ruins rise up, or I don't know. They could come up with a couple of things, but I think
basically like you have to do these dungeons first to progress.
Yeah, the 3 pendants to get the Master Sword before you can go to the
but you can still tackle them in any order you want. I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's a way they can get around it, because like I do think one of the big strengths of the game is you can tackle things however you want. And like I said, that led to a lot of emergent gameplay that other games wish that they had. I would like to see some more just general enemy types. I want to say there was like 5 or 6 in Breath of the Wild.
So, you know, like that's like a point we didn't talk about it, but the enemy types in Breath of the Wild did feel really repetitive. But if you think about it, there are quite a few, and it's similar, like again, into the original game. So you have like we don't have to count them all, but like there's like a dozen or so, and they come in different varieties. But because there's the world's so big and you see them so often, it feels like a really small pool.
That's
the problem. Yeah. Like
you're amazed like the first time you run into it, you're like I remember the first time seeing a Lionel, I was like, he's scary.
It was
looking.
The scariest thing. I didn't
he's staring at me. I don't know what I should do. And then like after that, like you kind of just see it and you're like, oh, there's a Lionel. I should maybe go to
I never got to that point
more if I don't want to fight it.
They were always a challenge, and I would always try to avoid them. One time I did bump into one by accident because I was coming around a corner and there was one that was just there and I didn't see him. And it was like the scariest thing that ever happened. I will say the bosses in the world were awesome. And the Ganon Blight bosses in the dungeons were meh.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, like I think more interesting bosses, and like I loved the ones in the world. Like they were so cool, like because you would just stumble across like, I'm mining for rocks, and all of a sudden like one comes to life. And
that all goes back to, I feel like, just that open world's done right though. Like the entire everything in the environment is interactive, including like bosses and enemies.
I remember the first time I saw there were just skeletons around, and I was like, oh, whatever, that's just fill out the world or whatever. And then if you're around them and nighttime happens, they reanimate and come to life, and I remember that being really scary too. First time I saw that.
I know that Nintendo did a great job elevating my blood pressure with the song that plays every time I saw a Guardian.
Oh, that song.
I was like, no, it's so terrifying.
The
you
piano.
can put that over anything, and I'm immediately going to have like PTSD and get scared.
I do love Guardians. They were a great barometer for how strong you were feeling as a character. Because for the beginning of the game, they're just the most scary things. But at a certain point, I got a little bit more comfortable, like kind of was like, well, maybe I'll try fighting, because usually I just ran away. But like, yeah, and then towards the end of the game, I'm just eating them for breakfast. I was like, I need all their parts so I can upgrade this gear, you know. But like, that was a cool, natural way, because for a long part of the game, they were always a threat.
Oh yeah. So, but on that note, honestly, that's one of the things that we haven't talked about that I would absolutely want to see in Breath of the Wild too. You mentioned gear. I don't want any destructible weapons. I want my weapons to stay. Like,
I at least want the option.
give
Like, if
me
you're gonna
something.
do destructible gear, I'd like there to be an option, like, even if it's super convoluted and hard, to where I could upgrade it and maybe keep
Yes.
it. Because
It
I
doesn't
would run
break
into stuff
anymore.
I
I did-
loved, and I just wouldn't use it because I'm like, I don't want it to break.
That's
Right,
something
it's
Skyward Sword
counterintuitive.
did, yeah.
Yeah, and I would love for them to take the concept of durability and like openness, where you can pick up anything and use it as a weapon and keep that. That's fine. You know, pick up a branch and like a couple whacks later it breaks. But like, if I forge a super cool sword, or I find one like embedded in the skull of a dead, you know, titan in the desert, which is a thing you can find, like there's that big skull and there's a sword on it.
Yeah.
This sword breaks like every other sword, so it doesn't feel like, you know, like at first you're like, yeah, this is awesome, and then
it breaks.
Yeah, it's something
I
special.
mean, even like the hero weapons and stuff broke.
Yeah,
I didn't even use them. I collected the hero stuff and I put it in my house.
I did the
hung
same
it up in
thing.
my house because I was like, I
Don't touch
know
it.
you can go back and get it again, like if you go talk to them, but like honestly, I don't even like. It's almost not even worth it.
right,
I love,
right.
I love the idea of durable weapons because because the whole point of the game, the whole thesis for the game is like, you have to survive, and that's one of the things is like you kind of need to always be like on the hunt for some new stuff, and it kind of forced, like, I never would have used the boomerangs and stuff like that. I will say they should last a little bit longer. You should be able to use, it's another thing you can start collecting is like, another thing you can use for like material you collect is you can forge them in different ways. I don't think maybe you can make them permanent, but you can make them really durable, and I think they should have like a durability meter. I know it's not immersive in the world, but like,
Oh, that's the other
Yeah.
problem.
At
It's like,
least know
let
it.
us, yeah,
yeah, let us
But-
know, because then we can go get them fixed. But like, that might be
You can
something
get-
something cool. Like, you can level up your own blacksmithing skills or something. Like, it's another thing you can do.
you could get this, you can get around this problem really easily, where you can have your durability and you can have your survival, the setup where you have to scrounge and find the tools in the field, but have it be like Morgan was saying, like a quest where you can enchant maybe like 2 items, right? Like pick 2 swords that you can enchant and that's yours forever. Or like, you can do it as many times as you want, but it's difficult every time, like just give us something to earn and keep, so that the rewards feel more permanent than this was neat for a few minutes, but then I
I wouldn't even be mad if they threw in a couple weapons like the Master Sword was, where it had to charge. Even then, I'd be like, okay,
And then
I
I
have to be selective with it, but at least I know, like, I can't use it just once.
I defended that. I was like, well, the Master Sword doesn't break, but it is annoying.
It is.
It takes too long.
That should be the one thing in the game that does it.
Right.
I was about, see, but if it did, that's all you would use.
Yeah, but that's fine because you got to the end of the game, you earned it.
Yeah,
right? Like,
that's kind of
it's not. You can't start with it, right?
I would say, what would you guys think of trying increasing your durability to say something like Korok seeds instead of them giving you a piece of poop at the end of it? Like, that's something. That's another thing you could spend them on, is like the Koroks do some sort of enchantment.
Right. Yeah, you could do that. That's fine, because then you're
again,
dying
do something on the side that's like not easy, because you don't want to let people just
of course,
enchant everything they pick up, but
kind of like how
at least
how you
the
spend
option
them
to
on
do it to a couple.
kind of like how you spend them on like your inventory upgrades as it is. They have an increasing cost each time, so you still have to be judicious with what you want. Like, you're not going to get like your rusty sword, like that's not worth spending 30 Korok seeds on.
Right.
It'll also bump up the next thing to be more expensive.
I mean, something like that could definitely work. I don't know if either of you played it, but there was a weapon system in Final Fantasy VII Remake that I thought was phenomenal, because it's the first time that I've ever seen an RPG try to tackle the problem of, well, how do we overcome the fact that the weapons that you get are only useful for like 5 or 10 minutes until you get a new powerful weapon, right? Like some games lean into that, like Borderlands or Diablo, and they're just constantly throwing new weapons at you, so it doesn't matter. But like other games, like Final Fantasy VII has weapons that people are fond of. They could become functionally useless after a point, right? This weapon system allowed you to upgrade the weapons themselves. So the weapons would get like a sort of experience points that you could spend to improve certain like innate stats. Like this weapon gives you an extra materia slot, or plus 10% HP, or plus 10% critical hits. And you could decide how you wanted to spend those points and level up the weapon. And you could even do it like you could wipe it and then re-roll it. But it meant that even the Buster Sword was viable at the end of the game. Or not. You didn't have to use it.
Yeah.
Like, you could use all of the weapons along the way, and some of them were like, they had more perks that would make you better at magic or physical or defense or something. So you could spec out like a specific kind of character. Or you could go with the one you like, look the coolest, and just like add stuff to it to compensate. So I like that system. I'd love to see something like that in a Zelda game, where they let you like decide which weapon you do want to use throughout it.
Yeah.
Give you a degree of customization, because I love the Master Sword design. I think it's so cool. I hate in A Link to the Past, it's one of the few things I don't like about it, that to upgrade it you have to turn it into like a red sword. I don't like the red sword. I like the before.
Exactly. I like the cool looking one.
Yeah,
and like the Master Sword might be cool if like it had an upgrade like that. Like, because it's a sequel, you might even just start with it. But I'd be cool with like, all right, so it still has its annoying cooldown thing, but like maybe you can collect like they had it in like Breath of the Wild, like some sort of like Orichalum types, like Master Ore is what I think it was called.
yeah.
So you could use it to upgrade it. Maybe by the end of the game, like it just works all the time.
Right. That would be cool.
Yeah.
How about you, Scott? What else do you want to see?
I mean, really, dungeons are the main thing I kind of want to add. I mean, like I said, like especially thinking about it now, because I mean, even when I was playing it, I was like, oh, there's so many things I'm missing. But like talking about it now, like I don't want it to change that drastically. I just kind of want more classic Zelda stuff in it. I know while I was playing it, I was annoyed by the dungeons and the lack of music, but that kind of doesn't really bother me as much.
I thought that was going to be one of my biggest complaints, because the Zelda music was, I mean, it's iconic. Right off the bat, the very first song from the very first game is just like it hits you in the face with how cool and memorable it is. And I really expected to miss that, and then I didn't as much.
I really haven't even thought about that.
The songs it has are good,
so well done.
but it's going for like a more minimalist, like ambient thing. So it's not bad. It's just what the game is going for.
Yeah, they didn't want to annoy you
really
the entire time by playing the same, obnoxious song over and over and over.
Yeah.
Although I would like, now that you say that, I would like an option, like maybe there is like a music mode, right, where you can have a more traditional video game soundtrack to it.
It can be an app you get for your iPad. Yeah.
But I had that's for your chic pad. You're like,
he's got a Spotify on there.
Oh my god, that's a great idea. That's exactly how they should do it. But I just played a game recently that has a similar Zelda setup, like very much Zelda inspired, called Nier Automata. I don't know if either of you have played that.
I'm aware of it. I haven't played it.
It was on my list for a very long time, and I finally played it. And that game is very much a Zelda map, right? There's a section here, there's a desert over here, and there's a sunken city over here, and there's a town over here, and there's a hub that you move through. But that has music almost constantly, and it constantly plays with the idea of the music too. Like there's a song that'll play, and then I don't want to spoil anything, but like something happens in the game, and it's the same song. The lyrics are different now, but like it's always playing, like an overworld song, and I think you can have the constant music without destroying the ambiance of whatever you're trying to go for.
So the opera boss is what sticks out.
Well, I was about to say, did you guys play the Doom reboot? What was it, 2016?
Oh yeah, I just beat Doom Eternal this week actually.
I'm waiting to pick up Doom Eternal, but that's had a soundtrack.
That music.
Well, that has a soundtrack that would change, and there's like 30 different versions of each song depending on what weapons you're using, what demons show up. So like you can have like obviously we don't have to go so hardcore metal for Zelda, but you can have these
Why not?
these like living responsive soundtracks to it for what's going on. And then when not much is going on, it can kind of settle down and go into it's more like plonky piano stuff that they were doing.
Yeah, I think that's how you do it. You could have like a lot of different variants on the songs, and then keep it contextually appropriate, but still get more classic Zelda tunes in there.
Yeah.
I just love Wind Waker. It was like each island had their own soundtrack. Like I could hear it in my head, and I'm immediately like, "Oh, that's Windfall Island. Oh, wait, that's Dragon Roost." And it's like even if they did it in like I know like they did it a little different in certain areas in this game. Like I remember being in like the snowier areas, and it's kind of quiet. And like they did that, but I wish it was like you're saying, like a little more diverse, where you're like that hits you a little bit more. That like, oh, I've just walked into a new area, and now
I think it would go a long way towards solving the problem of those forgettable sections too, because music is such a strong way to tie a memory to something that the original Zelda music, again, like you hear the start of that, it's like you're instantly transported. Like you can almost see the screen in your head. The Hyrule Overworld music is just iconic, and again, like it creates these memories as you hear it. But because you don't have that so much in Breath of the Wild, you don't get those memories, and when they do, when like classic, like unique music does show up, it almost like solidifies. Like again, it's the Hyrule Castle in the center has that incredible soundtrack.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like when you get to it, you almost forgot that there hadn't been music through most of this game. You're like, oh,
exactly.
damn.
Like when you go, for example, when you go to the Rito Village, it's the Dragon Roost Island song.
Yeah.
Instead of being like kind of this upbeat tropical thing, is because now they're like in like a mountainy area. It's got kind of a different vibe to it. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. I didn't realize that the Horse Stables was Epona's song until sometimes Cass is there, and then he plays the rest of this, basically finishes the song with his accordion. I'm like, oh, that's really cool.
Right,
Not
but
that
it is so
needs to
minimal.
only be old
Exactly.
Zelda songs, but
like I can remember, I can remember where song changes occurred in like different instances and areas, but like most of them I couldn't even tell you like what the song was or like how it went or anything.
Right.
Where I feel like in a lot of Zelda games, it's like it'll be stuck in your head for like a month. Like you can recite it.
Yeah. But well, I think we solved Breath of the Wild too. So
all right, cool. Nintendo,
where's the money, please?
Is that
just drop a few iconic dungeons in Breath of the Wild 1, refresh the story a little bit, and like I feel like I'd be a happy camper.
They don't have to change a lot, really.
Yeah, it's like I said, still a great game. Like I've actually been like feeling an itch to replay it for the better part of the last year.
Me too.
Very recently. I didn't get the DLC, so because I got it for Wii U, I didn't buy a Switch when it first came out.
I did get the DLC.
Yeah, so
I did too. I didn't finish it.
Yeah,
because it's hard.
Yeah, I got to. Was it released in 2 waves?
Yeah.
DLC? I got to the second wave,
some other thing
where you're going back through each area, and I think there was like one of the. Do you replay the bosses? I'm trying to remember what exactly you do.
I didn't get past the first DLC. It was just so hard. It's where you have to use that weapon that has that reduces your hearts to 1. So you can one hit.
Yep.
And you can only do stealth because like all out combat is instant death. Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I didn't get very far.
I got like the 3 areas done, and then there was one that I just never did. I did have one more question about this.
Up?
How did you both feel about the voice acting?
It was okay. I wasn't really wild with the performances. I was barely even in the game. So I kind of forgot about it most of the time. And then all of a sudden Zelda talks in this like fake British accent. I'm like, oh yeah, there's voice acting.
That's right. She did have a British accent. I like that there was voice acting. I like that they played around with Link not talking. Like I always love when they get cheeky with that because it's one of those things where he's got to be saying something, What's he saying, But that they didn't.
Yeah. So
Go
as
ahead.
long as Link doesn't talk, I really don't care.
Exactly what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the voice acting was fine, and I was happy to have it. I just don't have Link talk. Keep him
Yeah.
silent.
I was open to it, and it's like one of those things that kind of like caught me off guard each time. Like you went into a scenario, like I was like, I kind of did the same thing. I was like, oh wait, you guys talk now, and it kind of like initially made me a little uncomfortable. But I'm just like that Nintendo games, like I've said this to Scott before, like in the new Luigi's Mansion, Mario saying anything besides Mario makes me super uncomfortable. I just like don't like it.
Yeah. No, yeah. Sometimes Luigi will say things where I'm like, that's stretching the belief.
I'm just like, you're not supposed to say anything else besides your name.
Say if you
Or
guys
let's
ever
go.
if you guys ever meet Charles Martinet, he'll talk to you in like his character voices. I'm like, please don't.
Oh man, I
I've met him.
Yeah.
He said my name in the Mario voice before, and I was like, I literally told him, I was like, I can die happy now, actually.
Well, my kids, I have a Mario voice that I do, and my kids will demand that I do it. And Scott's heard it before because
Yeah,
I used to say it in the store all the time. But I'm not going to do it now because it's not good. But no, otherwise, yeah, I agree. There are times when you're like, I kind of, can you go back to with a you know, when someone talk. But no, I liked it. I hope I'm sure there's gonna be more.
Oh, I'm sure it's coming back. Once that
Yeah.
cat's out of the bag, you can't put it back in. I think.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can't really just make them all silent now. Like, oh,
Yeah.
they took a couple pages out of Link's book and they decided they're not talking anymore.
Yeah. It's all silent protagonists. But yeah, unless there's anything else you guys want to bring up Breath of the Wild related. We went long again. We always go long. I always say it's going to be an hour. It's always at least an hour and a half.
It was fun.
Yeah, I like the whole reason we do the show is like, hey, here's a bunch of things I want to talk about. Here's some people I want to talk about it with. So let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's entertaining for people. But yeah, with that, Morgan, where can people find you online?
I'm pretty much Moglin. It's Moaglin on all my social media, or Moglin XX on, I think, Twitter. Everything else is Moglin. You can find me there and all my cosplay fun stuff. And I'm always on your pages too, creeping around and stuff. So worst comes to worst, just look there.
That's no problem. Sean and I are obviously from Level Up Entertainment, comic and video game store in the Hamilton Mall in Mays Landing, New Jersey. You can find us at levelupentertainment.com, and we're like Level Up Entertainment on just about every form of social media, or like Level Up Ent for short.
Yeah.
Right now we're doing Free Comic Book Summer. Every Wednesday, some of the books that would have been for Free Comic Book Day are released. Come in the store, they're free with any purchase. We have some Source Point Press graphic novel giveaways that we give away every week. So just come in, that's a free entry for that. In addition to that, shoplevelup.com is our web store. We can do mailing and curbside if you're not comfortable coming out for COVID. The COVID's made me a huge germaphobe, so the store is kept very, very clean.
It's a good thing to be right now.
Yeah.
But I understand if you don't feel safe, coming out. You don't want to risk it, don't risk it. We have all kinds of ways to get you stuff, get our stuff to you.
Yeah.
Obviously, this podcast is a thing. Share it around. We're on YouTube, Spotify. I submitted to iTunes like a month ago, and I still haven't heard anything. But we are available. We're also on SoundCloud. If there's any place where you want to listen to podcasts that I didn't mention, let me know. Either comment on any of these web zones where this is, or send us an email at contact@levelupentertainment.com. If you have a topic you'd like to see us tackle in a future episode, please leave a comment or contact us again at contact@levelupentertainment.com. Our topic for next week's, we're going to be talking about the new baseball season.
What baseball season?
Yeah, this new short baseball season. I'm hosting that, and I'm putting that in quotes. I'm mostly going to be there to hit record. But our friends Greg, Harry, and Joey are huge baseball guys, and hearing them talk about it.
I knew exactly who it was going to be before.
Yeah, hearing them talk about it's a lot of fun. So I think
it is.
I think it's going to be a good episode. This is the first one I selfishly just want to listen to, but I'll still be there just to ask layman questions. But yeah, I think that's going to sign us. That's going to take us for it's the last announcement for this episode. I'd like to thank our guests again for generously giving us their time. But yeah, until next time, guys, be safe out there.